A month after our father's funeral, my brother was already auctioning off all his belongings. The tools from the garage, the watch he wore every Sunday, even his wedding ring. But what he didn't know was that I was there, among the buyers. I created a fake profile, started bidding on the items he was selling, and recorded every move. Evidence, messages, transactions, everything. What started as pain turned into strategy. On the day the auction closed, he discovered the truth, but it was too late. The justice he never expected came from the very hands of the brother he betrayed.
The day was gray, and the wind creaked the windows of the house where his father's scent still lingered. Lucas walked down the narrow hallway, touching the furniture with his fingertips, as if the simple gesture could keep some part of him alive. With each step, the hollow sound of the wooden floor reminded him of the weight of his absence. His mother slept in the bedroom, exhausted from crying so much, while silence filled every room. In the basement, the air was heavy, thick with grease and memories. His father's tools remained organized in the same way, as if he might return at any moment to fix something. Lucas bent down in front of the workbench and noticed an empty space on the shelf. The wrench his father used to adjust his son's bicycles was missing, a simple but irreplaceable piece. She tried to convince herself that someone might have taken it accidentally, perhaps her brother, but a discomfort grew in her chest, an unsettling feeling that something was wrong. Death had left not only pain, but a space conducive to moral disorder. And in that mournful silence, even the dust seemed to hide secrets. As Lucas climbed the stairs, he heard laughter coming from the kitchen. Eduardo was on the phone, laughing loudly, an out-of-place laugh. He was talking about business and opportunities, words that sounded strange in that grieving house. Lucas hesitated on the stairs, watching his brother as if trying to decipher a foreign language. When the call ended, Eduardo greeted him mechanically, avoiding eye contact. There was something different in his gaze, something cold, calculated. Lucas responded with a restrained nod and left. That night, lying in bed, he realized that his brother's grief seemed different. It wasn't sadness, it was haste. In the following days, Lucas began to notice small details: boxes disappearing, locked cabinets, the garage emptier. Each absence was a wound. When he asked, Eduardo would answer with short phrases, "I threw away what was no longer useful." Lucas's heart ached. For him, everything was useful. Everything had a memory. The basement became both a refuge and a prison. He spent hours there, trying to preserve what little remained. With each rusty nail, each oil stain, he felt his father closer. Until an idea struck him. What if his brother was getting rid of things for another reason? The doubt settled in, poisonous, and would never leave him in peace. That morning, Lucas went downstairs again, turned on the yellowish light, and observed the empty space of the tool. "You wouldn't let this happen, Dad," he murmured. Silence answered. And it was in that instant, in the muffled sound of the lamp, that he made the decision to find out what was really happening. Before we continue, tell me, how far would you go to protect the memories of those you love? If family stories that blend love, loss, and secrets also resonate with you, subscribe to the channel now, because here, every story is a mirror of real life. We will follow this journey together until the end. 2 days later, while searching online for an antique piece his father had always wanted to buy, Lucas saw something that took his breath away. At the top of the online auction page, a familiar image flashed on the screen: his father's wedding ring. The title of the ad was chilling: "Antique gold wedding ring, rare item, excellent condition. He clicked, feeling his whole body freeze. The description was meticulous, almost overly respectful, as if written by someone who knew every detail of the piece. And they did. The cruelest part, however, was on the seller's side. Eduardo C. Almeida. The name hit him like a blow. For a few seconds, Lucas stood motionless, staring at the screen, hoping it was a mistake. But his heart knew. His brother was auctioning off his father's legacy. A mixture of anger and disbelief overwhelmed him. How could someone do this a month after the burial? His father had barely rested in his grave, and Eduardo was already turning his memories into numbers. Lucas felt the blood pounding in his temples. He thought about confronting him right then, but instinct prevailed. No, not now. He needed proof. He grabbed paper and pen, wrote down the website address, the lot number, the starting bid. He took screenshots and printed everything, one by one, as if he were compiling a dossier. Anger transformed into method. Pain became strategy. Justice, a silent plan.
Meanwhile, Eduardo continued acting normally, smiling on the phone, leaving home early and returning late. His naive mother believed he was dealing with probate matters. Lucas watched in silence, feeling a lump tighten in his throat. His love for his father now demanded coldness. That night, he looked at the website again and noticed there were other items listed. The wristwatch, the tool set, even the old silver lighter. Each object told a story, and Eduardo was selling them all, bid after bid. Lucas closed his eyes, fighting back tears. The pain of grief now had a new name, betrayal. As he lay in bed, he decided what he would do. He wouldn't confront his brother, not yet. He would create a fake profile, participate in the auction, and buy whatever he could, not just to recover what belonged to his father, but to gather evidence. The war would begin silently. He would open his laptop the next day and, under a made-up name, become his own brother's biggest buyer. The next morning, Lucas woke before sunrise. The house was still asleep, shrouded in silence and the weight of absence. He sat down at the computer, his heart racing, as if he were about to commit a crime. He opened the auction website, looked at the items again, and took a deep breath. He created a new account with a neutral name, Marcos Viana, a cold identity for an emotional mission. Each click was a step toward the truth. The website asked for data, address, card number. Lucas hesitated. He felt he was crossing an invisible line between justice and deceit. But looking at the photo of the wedding ring on the screen, he remembered his father's calloused hands and didn't back down. He confirmed his registration and received the welcome email. He was in the game. In the following days, he began to live in two worlds. By day, he was the silent son who helped his mother, feigning normalcy. At night, he became the mysterious buyer, observing his brother's every move. The website's automated messages became his routine. Each new item listed was a stab in the chest. The first test came quickly, a set of tools from the garage, advertised as a vintage collection. Lucas placed the first bid. His heart raced when the system confirmed, "You are the current highest bidder." He smiled bitterly. He was buying the past so he could protect it. Eduardo, unknowingly, was responding to the fake profile with automated messages. "Thank you for your interest, Mr. Marcos. I hope you enjoy the item." Each word was ironic. Lucas felt a mixture of anger and sadness. It was as if he were talking to a stranger, using his own brother's face. Over time, he realized that Eduardo acted with business efficiency. He listed items every day, kept a spreadsheet with their values, and responded to buyers like a professional. Greed had erased the grief from his face. Lucas watched, powerless, transforming pain into strategy.
One night, while reviewing the auction history, he noticed that Eduardo was planning a big online event to liquidate everything at once. It was the perfect opportunity and the ultimate risk. He needed solid proof before it all disappeared. He printed screenshots, recorded transactions, and saved copies to a flash drive. He spent hours doing this with almost obsessive precision. The sound of the keyboard echoed like hammer blows. He wasn't sleeping well anymore. His eyes were heavy, but his mind remained sharp. The name Marcos Viana began to appear frequently on buyer lists. Intrigued, Eduardo commented to his mother about a generous collector who values his father's things. Lucas almost laughed. The sarcasm of the situation both hurt and amused him. That night, looking at his reflection on the monitor, he noticed something frightening. He was beginning to resemble his brother. The same cold gaze, the same tense calm. "I'm not doing this for myself. It's for Dad." But deep down, he feared he was crossing a point of no return. The special auction was scheduled for the following Sunday. Lucas prepared as going to war. His room was transformed into a base of operations. Papers, screenshots, receipts, a cup of cold coffee, and his laptop open with multiple tabs. The screen reflected his tense, determined expression. At 8 p.m., the event began. Eduardo appeared on video with a confident smile, presenting the items that would be sold. Behind him, Lucas recognized every detail of his father's garage, the shelf, the workbench, the old wooden bench. It was a cruel spectacle. He took a deep breath and concentrated. The first item, his father's pocket watch. Starting bid, 200 reais. He typed in the amount, waiting for a reaction. Another buyer topped the bid in seconds. His heart raced. He raised the bid, again and again, until finally the system announced, winning bid, Marcos Viana. It was only the beginning. The following rounds were emotional torture. Each object carried a memory. The lighter his father used at barbecues. The hammer he swore was better than any new one. Lucas bid in silence, his hands trembling, while his brother thanked the buyers for their support. Among the items, one stood out: the alliance, the ultimate symbol of his father's life with his mother. Starting bid, 1,000 reais. Lucas hesitated. He knew Eduardo would have his eye on this item. He waited a few seconds, feigning indecision. Then he increased the bid discreetly, steadily, patiently. The dispute intensified. Another profile entered the fray, but Lucas persisted until he won. When the screen displayed item 1, he leaned back in his chair, exhausted. His chest ached. He had recovered the ring, but at the cost of something inside him that was beginning to fade.
Eduardo seemed radiant, oblivious to who was on the other side of the screen. He spoke naturally about honoring his father's legacy, while selling every piece of his memory. Lucas almost shouted but restrained himself. He recorded the entire video, noting the time, the tone, the words. They would be precious evidence. Hours later, the auction ended. Lucas had bought almost half of the items. The price was high, but what was at stake was priceless. He saved the entire history and sent copies to himself. The plan was working, and revenge was beginning to take shape. When he turned off the computer, the reflection on the monitor showed a different man. His eyes were tired but steady. For the first time since the funeral, Lucas felt he had control over something. The silence of the house enveloped him like a cloak. Outside, the wind blew, carrying the distant scent of the empty garage. And he murmured almost voicelessly, "I promise, Dad, no one will erase what was yours." The following weeks were a meticulous routine. Lucas lived with his eyes fixed on the computer, observing every update of the auction. He created a detailed spreadsheet with the values, dates, and descriptions. Each filled-in line was a piece of the puzzle that brought him closer to the truth. He was no longer sleeping well. He dreamed of notifications and the sounds of a hammer banging. With each new sale, the same ritual. Screenshots, receipts, automatic messages, printouts of conversations. The pen drive that held the files had become his silent treasure. It was concrete proof that his brother had turned the inheritance into a business. He knew that in the end, it would be impossible to deny. But behind the coldness of the method, there was pain. With each document saved, he relived a memory. His father polishing the workbench, his hoarse voice calling him for lunch, his muffled laughter on the garage radio. Everything now existed in the form of numbers and photos compressed into folders. It was a kind of digital mourning where longing became an archive. Eduardo, on the other hand, seemed increasingly confident. He wore new clothes, spoke on the phone in a tone that suggested he was running a company. When his mother questioned him about the money, he responded evasively, saying that everything was under control. Lucas watched silently, fueling the silence with anger and purpose. One night, while reviewing the documents, he noticed something different. Some sales were being handled by a different name, Rogerio Carvalho. Lucas, his cousin who worked in events, remembered childhood parties and their long-standing camaraderie. The idea that Rogerio might be involved caused him deep discomfort.
He decided to investigate. He contacted Rogerio's profile, still under the name Marcos Viana, and asked questions about the items. The response came within minutes, polite, objective, professional. "Yes, Mr. Marcos, I am assisting the seller in the process. Everything is legitimate." That word, legitimate, it echoed like mockery. Lucas deliberately increased the bids, forcing Rogerio to interact more. He wanted to observe him, understand his tone, catch any opening. In each message there were hidden clues. Truncated words, sending times, even the use of commas seemed to betray the tension of someone who knew he was lying. Over time, Lucas began to realize that Rogerio didn't seem as comfortable as his brother. The answers were becoming shorter and shorter, and a certain nervousness was showing. There was a crack there, a moral fissure, and it was through that fissure that Lucas intended to enter. He compiled a dossier with his cousin's name, cross-referencing dates and values. Everything fit together. Rogerio was responsible for organizing and managing the sales. Eduardo only supplied the items. Now Lucas had more than anger. He had structure. He had a solid narrative. That night, sitting before the pile of papers, Lucas looked at his father's portrait on the wall and whispered, "I'm going to put an end to this, Dad." And for the first time, the phrase sounded less like a promise and more like a sentence. Sunday dawned muggy, and the air felt heavy in the house. Lucas knew he needed to proceed with caution. He decided to visit Rogerio in person, pretending to want to understand more about collections. He put on a calm expression, got in his car, and drove to the warehouse where his cousin organized the auctions. Each kilometer traveled seemed to tighten the bond between the past and the confrontation. Rogerio greeted him with his usual smile, friendly but tense. "Lucas, long time no see, man. It's great to see you." His tone was rehearsed, his gaze restless. Lucas responded politely, feigning interest in antiques. He wandered among the shelves, observing objects packaged with price tags. Among them, he recognized a box with his father's name handwritten on it. "This belongs to Dad," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Rogerio hesitated. Yes. Itul's brother asked me to keep it separate. It's part of the probate process. You know how it is." The answer came too quickly, and the nervousness was visible. Lucas felt his stomach churn. His cousin looked away, rummaging through the boxes as if trying to hide something.
He decided not to press him immediately. He asked questions about procedures, sales, and payments. Rogerio answered mechanically, but his hands trembled slightly. Lucas knew how to read people. He had inherited that from his father. And in that instant, he realized his cousin was torn between loyalty and guilt.
Before leaving, Lucas threw out the bait. If a buyer wanted to confirm the authenticity of the items, would they be able to see the original registration? Rogerio hesitated for several seconds. I would, but it's not common for people to ask that. Lucas smiled calmly. I would ask. Back home, he wrote down everything he had seen and heard. His cousin's tense face, his hesitant answers, the sweat on his hands. It was the behavior of someone hiding something big. He felt a glimmer of hope. There were cracks in the wall. He just had to push. In the following days, he resumed acting like Marcos Viana and continued talking to Rogerio. Gradually, the tone of the messages changed. His cousin began to show discomfort, to contradict himself, to confess between the lines. He recorded everything, patiently closing the net. And one night, after a longer exchange of messages, came the first direct clue. Rogerio wrote, "Your brother assured me that everything was fine with the inventory, that you had agreed to it. I only did what he told me to do." Lucas read those words with a racing heart. It was the missing piece of the puzzle, the moral proof. His cousin wasn't the main villain. He was just another pawn moved by Eduardo. But now the game had changed. He closed his laptop exhausted and leaned back in his chair. He knew the next step would be crucial. Revenge was no longer an impulse, but a strategic plan. And what started as a fake profile was about to become a real accusation. That night, the air felt heavier than usual. Lucas was alone in his room, the light from his laptop reflecting off his tired face. He reread Rogerio's messages for the 10th time, searching for any detail that could strengthen his case. The phrase, "I only did what he told me to do," echoed like a confession. He knew he needed to turn it into concrete proof. Using a simple app, he recorded the screen during a new conversation. He feigned interest in new auctions and got Rogerio to talk more. "Your brother assured me that everything was fine with the probate," the cousin repeated, trying to justify himself. Lucas felt his heart race. The plan was working, and his cousin didn't even realize it. "Are you sure he said the other brothers agreed?" he asked, maintaining his disguise. "Absolutely. Eduardo sent me a screenshot of your conversation. He said everything was settled," Rogerio replied hesitantly. He smiled bitterly. He had never had a conversation with his brother about this. The evidence was starting to pile up.
After ending the chat, he took a deep breath and let his head fall into his hands. The weight of the discovery hit him hard. Confirming the betrayal was different from merely suspecting it. Now there was no turning back. No excuses, no doubt, no possible reconciliation. For hours, he analyzed the screenshots, organized the recordings, cataloged each date. He coldly created folders with the following names: messages, receipts, testimonies, counterfeit prints. He was building a case, but also a wall between himself and his brother. Each file was a brick, each piece of evidence a farewell. At dawn, the sun streamed through the window, revealing the chaos on the table. Papers, notes, cold coffee, and deep dark circles under his eyes. The face reflected in the glass no longer looked like that of a son. It was that of an investigator. Love had given way to obstinacy. And for the first time, Lucas understood the meaning of the phrase his father always said, "The truth hurts, but it sets you free." He took the flash drive and put it in his pocket. He needed someone to transform this into something bigger, into legitimate action. Emotional justice was no longer enough. It was time for legal justice. He knew exactly who to turn to. But before leaving, he passed by his mother's room. She was asleep with an old photograph of her husband on her chest. Lucas watched her for a moment and whispered softly, "I'm sorry, Mom. This will hurt, but it's the right thing to do." So he left home determined. The journey to the lawyer's office would be the beginning of another war, one that would require courage, composure, and faith. Donna Lucia was known in the city for her firmness. Her office, filled with law books and certificates, exuded authority. Lucas entered with measured steps, carrying the briefcase with the evidence. When she greeted him, her firm and empathetic gaze gave him a strange sense of security. She was the type of woman who was not intimidated by injustice. "Sit down, my son. What brings you here?" she asked in a calm voice. Lucas took a deep breath and replied, "My brother is selling everything that belonged to my father, without probate, and I have proof." Donna Lucia raised her eyebrows, leaning slightly forward. "Proof?" He placed the flash drive on the table. "All of them." The lawyer turned on the computer, inserted the device, and began watching the videos, reading the messages and opening the screenshots. With each new piece of evidence, her expression grew more serious. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said, "You have a very strong case. What your brother did is considered fraudulent alienation of assets, and that could exclude him from the inheritance." The words echoed like a sentence. Lucas didn't know whether he felt relief or sadness. The lawyer continued practically, "We'll send an extrajudicial notification first. This will prevent him from continuing to sell. Then we'll file a lawsuit to nullify the transactions. Everything needs to be meticulous, and you shouldn't confront him directly. Let the law do its work."
Lucas nodded silently. There was something comforting in hearing someone give legal form to his pain. She didn't see the drama as a tragedy, but as a case. And perhaps that was what he needed, someone who would treat emotion with logic. In the following days, they worked together to assemble the process. Donna Lucia reviewed the documents, while Lucas helped build the timeline of the sales. It was strange to transform memories into evidence, but necessary. Each item sold now had a batch number and a price, as if his father's story could be audited. When the notification was ready, she read it aloud. "Mr. Eduardo C. Almeida is hereby notified to immediately cease the sale of assets belonging to the estate of the deceased Mr. Alvaro Almeida, under penalty of nullity and civil and criminal liability." Those words sounded like a silent thunderclap. The final blow was about to fall. Lucas signed the document with trembling hands, feeling the weight of the decision. "This will change everything," he said, staring out the window. "Go ahead," Donna Lucia replied. "But sometimes changing everything is the only way to put things in their place." That night, returning home, Lucas felt the air lighter. For the first time in weeks, he slept without turning on his computer. The plan was in motion. But deep down, I knew that the calm was just the prelude to the storm. The following days were a mixture of silence and tension. Lucas tried to maintain his routine without arousing suspicion. His mother, Donna Irene, spent her mornings watering the plants in the yard and her afternoons looking at old photos of her husband. The house seemed suspended in time, as if the world outside didn't exist. But inside, something about to collapse pulsed silently. On a rainy afternoon, she called her son over to talk. She was sitting in the armchair where her father usually read the newspaper, her gaze lost in thought. "Lucas, your brother has been acting differently," she said, her voice trembling.
He's been going out a lot, always on the phone, and I feel that you two are drifting apart." He took a deep breath, trying to maintain a neutral expression. "We're just sorting things out, Mom, nothing serious." But she knew that tone. A mother's instinct never lies. "You two can't fight, son. Your father hated seeing you like this." Tears streamed down her face, silently. "He used to say that when I was gone, you would only have each other." The words hit Lucas like a blow. He wanted to tell the truth, to tell her that Eduardo was destroying everything his father had left him. But he held back. That would break her. "I promise I'll take care of everything, Mom." The sentence came out sincerely, though heavy with pain. She held his hand tenderly, without imagining the weight behind that promise. In the following days, Lucas began to avoid his mother's gaze. Guilt gnawed at him, but duty prevailed. At times, he felt like he was betraying the peace of his own home. Eduardo, for his part, seemed more impatient. Conversations with his cousin became less frequent, and he began to show nervousness. The rumor of the upcoming notification, still unknown to him, hung like a shadow. Lucas observed every movement in silence, like a spectator of an inevitable tragedy. One night, Lucas heard a noise in the garage. He went downstairs slowly and found Eduardo sorting more boxes. "This still has value," he said to himself. Lucas watched silently for a few seconds until his brother noticed him. "Are you spying on me now?" Eduardo teased. "Just watching," Lucas replied curtly. The look they exchanged was cold, distant, unrecognizable. For the first time, they seemed like two strangers sharing the same house. When Eduardo left, slamming the door, Lucas stood still for a moment. The rain outside beat against the roof tiles, and the sound resembled a gavel of an auction. He knew the day of reckoning was approaching, and, in a way, also the day the mother's heart would be broken. The sun rose warm on Monday, but the air was heavy. Doña Lucia called early in the morning. "It's ready, Lucas. The notification will be delivered today." He remained silent for a few seconds before replying, "Do it." The fate was already sealed. At 10 in the morning, the bailiff headed towards the office where Eduardo worked. Lucas didn't go with him. He just waited. The clock seemed to drag on. Each tick-tock was a beat in my chest. At 11:47 a.m., my cell phone vibrated. It was a message from my lawyer. The notification was delivered. He was taken by surprise. He tried to deny it, but was speechless. Lucas closed his eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. The first battle had been won, but the price would be high. In the afternoon, the house phone rang. Doña Irene answered. Eduardo's voice, agitated, echoed loud enough for Lucas to hear from the other room. "Mom, Lucas reported me! He betrayed me!" she screamed. She looked at her son, confused. "Is that true, Lucas?" His silence was answer enough.
Donna Irene turned pale. Tears welled up instantly. "My God, you're going to destroy yourselves," she whispered, sitting down, stunned. Eduardo continued shouting on the other end of the line until she hung up. The sound of the phone hitting the hook seemed like a final point. Lucas tried to approach, but she pushed him away with a look. "Your father just passed away, and you're killing each other over what he left behind?" Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with disappointment. "I didn't raise you for this." He tried to explain, but she interrupted him. "I don't want to hear it. I just want my husband back." That night, Lucas left home and drove aimlessly. The city seemed colder, more distant.
He stopped the car near the cemetery and stood there, watching the faint lights among the trees. He felt a knot in his chest. Victory tasted tasteless. Meanwhile, in the office, Eduardo read the notification for the 100th time. He tore and crumpled the paper, unable to accept it. "This isn't going to stand," he said through gritted teeth. The game was now open. Upon returning home, Lucas found his mother asleep in the armchair, with his father's letter in her hands. The weight of what he had done crushed him, but at the same time an inner voice whispered, "The truth is the only way." And he knew the storm had only just begun. News of the notification spread quickly. Enraged, Eduardo showed up at his mother's house 2 days later, banging on the door forcefully. Lucas was in the living room, and the confrontation he had been postponing for so long was now inevitable. Donna Irene watched from the kitchen, her eyes brimming with tears, pleading for calm. But what was to come could no longer be contained. "You destroyed me, Lucas!" Eduardo shouted, his face red with anger. "You and that lawyer!" "I only stopped you from destroying what was left of our father," the brother replied, his voice firm. "You were always his favorite, weren't you? Always the righteous one, the moral one." He spat the words like venom. "But I was the one who took care of everything when he got sick. I deserved more than just memories." The silence that followed was deafening. Donna Irene wept softly, begging them to stop. "Please, my children, that's enough." But the two seemed deaf. Lucas stepped forward. "You didn't sell out for necessity, Eduardo. You sold out for greed, and you lied to me, to your mother, to everyone. I did what my father should have done. I turned scrap metal into money," he retorted, his eyes burning with fury. The mother screamed, "Enough!" Tears streamed uncontrollably. "Your father must be crying wherever he is." The weight of those words caused the silence to fall like thunder. Eduardo looked away, breathing heavily. Then, without saying anything more, he grabbed his car keys and left, slamming the door shut. In the following days, the house became cold and broken. The mother barely spoke. Lucas tried to keep himself occupied, and Eduardo disappeared. Rogerio, the cousin, also vanished, perhaps overcome by guilt, perhaps fearing the consequences. Donna Lucia, the lawyer, informed them that the case had been filed. The hearing date was set. Justice was drawing near. Lucas spent sleepless nights reviewing the evidence, mentally rehearsing what he would say. But more than anything, he felt his heart ache. The victory tasted bitter. With each printed document, each legal term, his father's face came to mind, as if asking, was this the right way to go? On the eve of the trial, Donna Irene called him into her room. Her eyes were sunken and her voice hoarse. "I'm not going to the hearing. I've already buried your father. I don't want to bury my children, too." Lucas tried to speak, but his voice failed him. She simply touched his face and said, "May God have mercy on you both." That night, he understood that the war that would begin in court would only be a reflection of the one that was already consuming him from within. The forum was packed that morning. The air was cold, the silence dense. Lucas arrived early, accompanied by Donna Lucia. Eduardo was already there, in a suit, his gaze hard and tired. The reunion was silent. Two brothers, side by side, separated by everything their father left behind and by everything he meant. The judge entered the room and everyone stood. The sound of the gavel echoed like an omen. The trial began. Donna Lucia presented the evidence with precision, screenshots, transactions, messages, videos, and finally, the recording of Rogerio. The atmosphere became tense. Eduardo lowered his head, his jaw clenched. When Rogerio was called to testify, the room fell into absolute silence. He entered with his head down, his hands trembling. The judge questioned him, and his cousin hesitated, looked at Eduardo, and finally at Lucas. Then he said in a low voice, "I participated in the auction, but Eduardo told me that his brothers knew. I didn't know it was illegal." A murmur echoed through the room. Eduardo closed his eyes as if expecting the final blow. Dona Lucia spoke calmly. "So, you confirm that you received payments and transferred funds to third-party accounts?" Rogerio nodded. "Yes, including for the defendant, Mr. Eduardo C. Almeida." "Yes, ma'am." The silence grew heavy. Lucas watched, without hatred, just exhausted. It was the naked truth, finally spoken by another voice. When it was Eduardo's turn to speak, he stood up, his eyes filled with resentment. "I just wanted to help pay the debts, keep the house, sort everything out quickly. My father didn't care about material possessions. I did what I thought was right." The judge observed him calmly. "The problem, Mr. Eduardo, is that justice isn't measured by what you think, but by what it is." The words cut through the air. When the sentence was read, time seemed to stand still. "Due to acts of willful alienation and breach of moral and legal duty in the administration of assets, the defendant Eduardo C. Almeida is excluded from the division of the estate." Eduardo stood motionless. Not a word came out of his mouth, only his teary eyes betrayed what he felt: anger, shame, and loss. Lucas remained silent, watching his brother be swallowed up by his own choice. Finally, the judge thanked everyone and closed the session. The sound of the gavel echoed once more, sealing everyone's fate. Eduardo stood up slowly, passing Lucas without looking at him. He whispered only, "I hope you're happy, brother." And he left. Lucas stood still, his body light and his heart heavy. Dona Lucia placed her hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing." He nodded without answering. Outside, the cloudy sky promised rain, and for the first time, Lucas realized that justice and pain can go hand in hand, and that both come at a very high price. The sound of the gavel still echoed in Lucas's mind as he left the courthouse. The late afternoon sun bathed the marble steps, but he felt cold. Dona Lucia said goodbye with a firm handshake and a respectful look. "You were worthy," she said. He thanked her, but the words seemed distant, as if from another world. Eduardo was leaning against the car, his suit crumpled, his gaze distant. When Lucas passed him, his brother raised his head. There was anger, yes, but also a remnant of sadness that made him almost human again. "You did it. Congratulations." Lucas looked at him for a moment, without resentment. "I didn't want to destroy you, Eduardo. I just wanted your father to be respected." But Eduardo just laughed, an empty laugh. Respect doesn't pay debts. The silence between them weighed more than any shout. Eduardo got into the car and drove away without looking back. Lucas stood there, watching the red lights disappear into the traffic. The feeling of victory was bitter, like iron in the mouth. There was no pleasure, only a cold emptiness, the distant echo of something lost.
In the days that followed, the news spread through the small town.
the son who sued his brother, the inheritance that divided the Almeida family. Every glance on the street was a new revelation. Lucas avoided going out, preferring isolation. He spent hours organizing the final inventory documents, trying to put an end to what had been dead for a long time. One afternoon, he received an unexpected message. It was from Rogerio. "I told the truth. I'm sorry. I never wanted to get involved in this." Lucas simply replied, "You did what you had to do. That's enough." And that was the end of the conversation. There was no room for resentment anymore. Eduardo never spoke to anyone again. He sold his car, quit his job, and disappeared from the city. His mother, devastated, rarely brought up the subject. Lucas tried to take care of her in silence, making tea, adjusting her medication, listening to old stories about his father as if trying to mend a broken vase. But at night, when the house fell asleep, he would gaze at his father's portrait on the wall, the serene smile, the steady gaze. "I did what you would have done, even though it hurt." And every time she said that, she felt the weight in her chest lighten a little. The process officially ended 2 months later. The judge ruled that all assets should be returned to the estate inventory. Eduardo's name was removed from the distribution. When Lucas signed the final document, he realized that justice had been served. But peace, that was still a long way off. That night, it rained, a calm, gentle rain, as if the sky were crying along with it. And for the first time, Lucas slept soundly, without dreams. The cemetery was located high above the city, surrounded by pine trees and a constant wind that seemed to whisper secrets. Lucas climbed slowly, holding a small wooden box in his hands. Inside was his father's wedding ring, the same one he had rescued from the auction, a symbol of regained dignity. The ground was still damp from the previous night's rain. The clouds moved slowly, and the sky looked tired. When he reached the gravestone, he knelt. Álvaro E. Almeida, father, husband, and honest man. The words engraved in the stone now had a new weight. Lucas set the box down on the ground and carefully opened it.
The ring gleamed in the dim morning light. He took it between his fingers and smiled, a small, tired, but sincere smile. "Dad, it's all over," he said. "The truth has come out. What was yours has returned home." The wind blew harder, lifting dry leaves, as if the world itself were responding. He stood there for long minutes in silence. He remembered his father repairing clocks in the garage, the stories told on rainy nights, the smell of oil and wood, and he realized that even in death, his father still guided his hands, was still teaching him to fix what seemed irreparable. "I did what I had to do, but if you could choose, I think you would prefer forgiveness to justice." The words came out softly, almost a whisper. Lucas didn't know if he was talking to his father or to himself. He placed the ring on the tombstone and closed his eyes. The cool breeze touched his face, and for a moment, he felt peace. A simple peace, which came not from victory, but from acceptance. The past could not be erased, but it could be understood. Before leaving, he cleaned the stone, removed some leaves, and stood up. "Watch over us from up there," he murmured. "Mom misses you every day." He took a few steps, looked back, and saw the ring glistening in the light. And for the first time, she felt no pain. She felt gratitude.
As he walked down the path from the cemetery, the sun began to peek through the clouds. And he understood that somehow his father was still there. Not in objects, but in the right choices, in the silent battles, in the small truths that sustain love. The following months were seemingly tranquil. The house returned to its routine. Coffee in the kitchen, the low sound of the radio, the wind rustling the curtains. Donna Irene gradually regained her smile, although longing still lingered in her eyes. Lucas worked in silence, organizing documents and trying to start over. The past seemed, at last, to rest. One night, while reviewing old emails to archive everything, a new message appeared in my inbox. The sender was anonymous. The subject line was short and to the point. Not everything that was sold belonged to his father. Lucas stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the screen. For a moment he thought it was a prank, but his body reacted with a shiver. His heart raced, bringing back a tension he believed was buried with his father. He opened the message. Inside, there was only one line and an attached photo. The image showed a different ring, silver, with a dark stone in the center, resting on a wooden table. Look for the safe. He didn't just leave tools. Lucas felt his stomach churn. He knew that table. It was the one from his father's old garage.
He got up, went to the backyard, and turned on the yellowish basement light. The atmosphere was, as always, the smell of rust, dust, and memories. He walked to the corner where his father kept the oldest things. Moving some boxes, he found the folded carpet that covered the cement floor. Beneath it, a faint, square mark on the surface. Using a screwdriver, he lifted the cracked cement until he found a small iron lid. His heart pounded. Inside, an old, rusty, heavy safe. Dad always said the secret was in keeping what truly matters. Lucas knelt down, his hands trembling, and turned the padlock. The lock snapped shut with a low click. Inside, there were few things. An old photograph of a woman he didn't recognize, a yellowed letter, and a sealed envelope with the name Eduardo on it. The shock made him recoil. For a moment, he didn't breathe. That changed everything. He picked up the letter and began to read. If you are reading this, it is because time has played its part. Not everything I left behind is material. The most serious mistake I made was hiding truths in the name of peace. A father must protect, but also confess. There are debts that are not of money. They are of blood. The words trembled in his hands. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was his father's. Lucas closed his eyes, fighting back tears. The letter continued, mentioning old business dealings, a woman named Helena, and the promise that Eduardo would understand when the time came. He put the envelope back in the safe, unable to open it. His mind was racing. His father had secrets, perhaps a past neither of his sons could have imagined. And now, after everything, it was Eduardo who possessed the missing piece of the puzzle. Lucas sat on the cold floor, leaning against the garage wall. The wind entered through the broken window, carrying the distant smell of rain. He smiled, a tired smile mixed with disbelief. "So that was it, Father," he murmured. "Even truth has heirs." He closed the safe, turned off the light, and slowly climbed the stairs. In his pocket, the unknown photo seemed to pulsate, alive, waiting for answers. Outside, the sky was covered with clouds, and the first clap of thunder broke the silence of the night. Not all truth needs a judge. Some just need to be heard. If this story made you feel something, anger, sadness, or even forgiveness,
Sign up now and activate the notification bell. Here, every week, you'll find real stories like this one, full of emotion, difficult choices, and family bonds that time cannot erase. I'll wait for you in the next chapter of life.